and welcome to this webinar where we talk about 5 steps to operationalize and mature your cloud security program. I'm Swaroop, part of the product team at Wiz, and we'll be taking you through this session today. So it goes without saying, the cloud is one of the biggest transformational experiences most organizations have faced. Yes, it is a new environment. It is workloads being run in a different place. But the challenge for a lot of security professionals and technologists is, how do I get visibility into this environment? How do I understand which libraries, frameworks, architectures are being deployed in this new environment? The second challenge that organizations face is, how do I prioritize the critical risks and eliminate noise in the cloud? Yes, we continue to have the challenges of yesterday in terms of malware, vulnerabilities, so on and so forth, but we see a lot of new additional risks that come with the cloud. So security teams face the real challenge of where do I focus? What are the issues that matter the most to me? The third area that a lot of organizations face is the cloud presents a new ownership model. Yeah, today what we face is that in the world of cloud native development, we are building and shipping applications multiple times in a day. Now, in this world of high speed, high agility, how does security enforce itself without coming in the way of the agility that engineers exercise? So we really need to bring engineering teams, software developers into the security process and ingrain security into the individual teams and follow the individual process. But one thing is very true, right? Sticking to the old processes and the procedures of before that we have tried for the last decade isn't going to cut it in this new environment. We need to stop trying to extend on-premise approaches and technologies to the cloud. We need to stop that approach of taking customized approaches per cloud environment or trying to build solutions individually on your own. And we need to prevent siloed individual use cases from being solved. In a nutshell, we need a cohesive approach that is built for the cloud, that works across different cloud environments, and that scales up for cloud scale. So in reality, we call this the unified platform for the modern cloud operating model, where the journey can start with reducing cloud risk and managing security posture, identifying critical risks that exist in your environment with very little effort without having the overhead to deploy agents, and then proactively reducing the attack surface. But from that point, we also need to make sure that security is ingrained in the first bits of code that are written in your developer pipeline, all the way up to production. And on the right, we need to make sure that real-time threats are detected and the organization is able to respond to cloud threats as they emerge. Now, we need to do all of these steps without leaving behind any cloud security stakeholder, right? It could be your developers, your DevOps teams, or all the way up to cloud security, governance, vulnerability teams, or incident responders. We need to make sure all these stakeholders are part of the cloud security journey in this new operating model. Now, today, we're going to talk about some of the best practices we have seen about maturing your cloud security journey, steps and practices we have learned from some of the largest companies out there, including over 40% of the Fortune 100. So this is some of the best distilled piece of advice that we have seen that very successful companies have leveraged. So for us, today we have a very simplified framework that we think is very applicable and appropriate for every organization out there. So this is a 5-step framework that can be extended as you add more and more cloud initiatives or more and more security initiatives in the cloud. This 5-step initiative or 5-step model really starts with gaining visibility, reducing critical risks in the cloud, enabling engineers to build in the cloud without worrying about security, and making sure both your code as well as your ability to respond to threats are taken care of as you mature in the cloud. So let's go through and see how this breaks out when we look at the Wiz platform. So for us, quite often, visibility is the starting point of the journey. You need to really get complete multi-cloud visibility where you can understand every component and resource that's running in the cloud or every workload that's running in the cloud, as well as the configurational elements of those pieces. So you need to be able to understand the identities, the network configuration, the data that's associated with those workloads, or the organizational controls that are associated with that workload, and get a complete overview of what's going on. But very importantly, you need to be able to gain this visibility without the traditional overhead of deploying agents in the cloud. You need to do this and gain this full visibility in a cloud native approach. Well, the next step, once you've gained visibility, is really querying this environment and understanding what are the risks involved. Now, this could be like understanding your misconfigurations, your vulnerabilities, your excessive identities, your data, your lateral movement risks, your AI risks, your external exposure, your sensitive data. Understanding all the risks in your cloud environment is the second step in your cloud maturity journey. But the question you really need to ask is every cloud risk created equally the same? And the answer is no. You need to learn to identify and prioritize the critical risks that exist in your environment. And these critical risks really need to be about prioritizing the attack paths to your crown jewels. Now, this could be as simple as a virtual machine that has a critical vulnerability, but happens to be exposed to the internet. But on that virtual machine resides an exposed secret and an identity role that when leveraged can result in PII data being exposed in that environment. So you need this level of insight that is able to tie together the different elements or different contextual elements in the cloud to piece together what is actually going on. So let's look at this from a best practices perspective, right? Historically, when you had individual siloed solutions, you were able to piece together the risks that existed in individual silos, right? So you need like, hey, maybe a workload that's publicly exposed. Maybe you identify the vulnerabilities that existed. You had a lot of KIM alerts identifying excessive privileges, and you had like sensitive data alerts showing you where data resided. The challenge here was that you were not able to tie all these pieces together in a cohesive manner so that you can tie and do all the correlation to understand, hey, all these risks and all these alerts together really, really represent a critical attack path inside of my environment. And that is what is really needed to like allowing your teams to not just identify, but also focus on the critical risks that, you need to really pay attention to. So you've done the first step. You've identified the most significant critical risks in your environment. The second piece is also about understanding what are the alerts that really matter, right? Maybe it's vulnerabilities where, most traditional raw scans result in thousands of alerts. But the question you need to ask is like, hey, of these thousands of alerts, where should I deploy my critical engineers or where should I deploy my engineers to focus on, right? And this is where like layering on threat intelligence to see which vulnerabilities have a public exploit, understanding public network exposure so that you can identify the likelihood that something is going to be like that something is likely to be attacked inside of your environment, and understanding the impact as well as like the action for the business from that vulnerability becomes very, very critical, right? So this could be like, hey, this particular library that's in memory, that is in code, is actually loaded in memory and has a lot of runtime signatures that I need to pay attention to. This provides a lot of critical context. So when you think about managing some of your critical vulnerabilities in the cloud, you need really a risk-based approach where you're able to quantify the risk to what it actually means for your organization. You also need to stay ahead of all the emerging threats, and you need a way to understand what is going on from across the landscape to understand what are the zero day indicators at play, and what are the alerts you need to pay attention to, whether it's like through private research, CISA or CERT notifications that might come through. What are those that you need to really pay attention to? You need to stay ahead of that. Well, let's take a step back and understand how far along are we. We've gained visibility into our environment. We have identified the critical risks in our environment. We've solved the two critical steps of the five-step journey in securing your cloud environment. So next, we need to really focus on democratizing security. We need to make sure the role of security in a cloud environment is strategic, and individual teams are enabled to self-service security for their own individual applications they own. So here, the focus of security becomes providing the guardrails and the governance needed so that individual stakeholders or teams can know how to operate, build, and deploy in the cloud. This includes providing security guidelines, but also providing clear remediation and providing clear guidance in terms of workflows as to how to resolve any sort of issues in the cloud. So when it comes to democratization, it's also very important to realize that individual teams and business units in the company might have different operating models and different risk tolerances. So here you need an organizing principle that allows that for flexibility across the organization. But you also need a way in which individual teams can be notified of the risk in the way that they are in their existing workflows. So for example, team A might use Slack, team B might use Atlassian or Jira or Confluence, and team C might use ServiceNow to work through their different security issues and drive through the life cycle of remediation and response. So now that you've focused on remediation and response, what you really need to strive to is reducing your critical risks to zero so that individual teams have really pushed the company to reduce some of the risk exposure for the organization. One common theme that tactic teams have done using the WISP platform is using what we call as the Zero Criticals Club as a mechanism and as a motivator to reduce all the critical risks. Now, organizations like Fox and Hearst have been very successful in both democratizing and enabling these teams to be very successful, enabling individual teams to be very successful and burn down and reach the Zero Critical Club. So let's take a step back, look at where we are on our journey, right? We've gained visibility, reduced critical risks, we've even democratized. Now, what else can we do? The next step is possibly shifting left or leaning right, depending on the needs of the organization. Here, teams can shift left and build securely by design has a lot of benefits to the organization. Here, as we shift left, we understand that individual teams have different approaches to shifting left. Now, you might start by deploying security controls in the IDE, but that might be too excessive or heavy-handed for some teams. And it might be best to allow security to operate inside of the pipeline by integrating into the VCS system and identifying what are the risks at play. You should be able to identify secrets, sensitive data, misconfigurations that exist in your code. But also you need to be able to operate across different touch points in the pipeline, right? Whether it's code, the build time, store and deploy, or even as applications are being deployed in a containerized world. The focus here as we shift left is to accelerate cloud remediation with context, shifting the security posture left, and enforcing secure by design, ensuring both your code, your DevOps tooling, and your pipeline are kept completely secure. The final piece in the journey is responding to threats in real time, providing the right sort of automation, cloud native automation to respond to both investigate and respond to threats, implementing incident response workflows, and ingesting cloud events from different SIEM and source solutions. So the best practices that organizations have leveraged here is to be able to prioritize and collect logs from all the different sources in the cloud environment and have a forensics response and be ready with a forensics response and response playbook. Here, the focus is to capture forensic data quickly and create response playbooks based on the findings from those logs. Additionally, teams might also choose to have another layer of protection by deploying a sensor that's able to detect malicious runtime behavior on the endpoints. Here, not only are teams able to capture these runtime signals, they're able to correlate that across different planes, whether it's your container Kubernetes, your cloud service provider plane, your data plane, your runtime plane, and really contextualize the risk at play to get into the details as to what actually happened. Now, this goes on further here, where you can see constructing a timeline to really build out what actually happened. Kind of gives a very deep understanding of hey, really kind of up levels your investigation response skill set to understand what actually happened inside of your environment. And finally, the focus is really about fixing at the root and driving resilience, right? You need to make sure that, hey, based on the runtime threats you detected, how can you take those learnings and fix those issues deep in the engineering pipeline so that you never have those issues again, right? In this case, it could be like a vulnerability that was detected in runtime, or it could be a misconfiguration or an accidental exposure that you want to drive. The focus here is to focus on driving resilience for the organization. So hopefully with that, you've seen the 5 critical steps that every organization needs to take to achieve a high level of maturity in the cloud. This starts, as I said once again, by getting visibility, focusing on your critical risks, democratizing security, and shifting left or shifting right based on your business needs to enable your organization to prevent risks or threats that might exist. With that, we're very happy to take any additional questions you might have. Thank you.